think Sharon trusts us while we were away. She left us a lot of words while we were preparing. So it seems like we have a lot of words early in the service, and I'm going to give us more words. Mark, the 8th chapter. Working our way this year through the Gospel of Mark. We've made it, 8th is really just halfway, but you're starting on the last section of Mark, the last section. Mark 8, verse 27. Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" They answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He then asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If you want to become my follower, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes into his glory, the glory of his Father and the holy angels." This is the reading of God's word. Thanks be to God. Made it to the last section of Mark. Those of you who've hung with me for this whole few months as we've been looking at it, we have made it, and a transition in chapter 8 really happens. Just before we made it to this passage, there was a second feeding. Wanda a few weeks ago preached about the first feeding of 5,000, this time only 4,000. But there was feeding of 4,000, so a big miracle had happened again. And then Jesus does this thing that I think really gets him to be human for me. He heals a blind man in Bethesda. If you look back just a few verses, you see that happening. If you read that, it's an interesting story because Jesus does as he does in other places. He spits and puts it on the man's eyes. And the man opens his eyes. He says, "Can you see?" He said, "I can see, but it looks like many people walking around like big trees." So what does Jesus do? Try it again. That's something human about that for Jesus. Something touches me. It reminds me of my mother. When I would get to church on Sunday morning, somehow between home and church, something would get on my face. And she'd have to take her handkerchief out. Did this experience happen to any of you all? And she would and wipe my face where I'd gotten something on. And then the worst that could possibly happen was if that didn't get it off and she had to hog it and do it a second time. Did you ever have? You may have had that experience. I had it. She fixed me up, got me presentable in public. She's still here around today. I haven't left church, so I guess that's all. After that big miracle, this healing, then Jesus has a turn. In Mark, you may not notice it if you're just reading along, but it's a turn. He heads back to, he goes by Caesarea Philippi, which means he's heading back to Jerusalem, where you know, because you know the rest of the story, he will eventually be crucified there. This is the turning point for Mark. He's turned Jesus, he's done his teaching, done his big part of what he'll be doing publicly. Now he's turning back and headed back toward Jerusalem, headed towards his crucifixion. And the questions for the disciples suddenly become serious. It's going to be test time. You need to get ready. So he asked them, but like any great teacher, and you've known good teachers in your lives, like any great teacher, he starts by doing a general question, not one that's real focused and about that person. He asks something that's easy that everybody can answer. You all are out there in the community. Who are people saying I am? He asked. Who do they say? And the disciples answer, oh, they say you're John the Baptist. They say you're Elijah returned, because you know Elijah was taken up to heaven, that you're Elijah, the great prophet, or maybe another prophet. They say, they give him all these answers. And Jesus, in his own way, pauses and then says, who do you say? Who do you say I am? Had a buddy in high school who was that guy in class. His name was Mark Baluha. If you have a name like that, you got to live up to it, I guess. Baluha, only blue ha's I ever knew with his family. And Mark, though, was one in class that always thought he was smarter than the teacher, first of all, which was a problem. But then he would get to whatever we were trying to do first. And I had a chemistry teacher who was brighter than him. And he would always be the one that when we would start to do an experiment, would get to it and mess up something before it could even get started. Things were put together. So one day in class, she decided to help Mr. Baluha. And she put test tubes on our desk, and we had a couple of chemicals there. And as she started to talk to us about what we were going to do and explain what was on our desk, and she said, and don't put these two chemicals together, because as you'll see at Mr. Baluha's desk, and he had combined two of them, and they had exploded all over his desk, run down him. He was a perfect example. This is what will happen, she said. Well, Peter was the Mark Baluha of the disciples. He's the one, if you remember, head first into it. Yes, Lord, we can do it. Let me at it. I have no idea, but I'll go. That was Peter. And Peter, though, this time gets it right. Who do you say I am? Jesus asked. And Peter, in his own quiet way, simply says, the Messiah. The one we've been waiting on for hundreds of years, the one that all the scribes and Pharisees have been teaching about would be coming. You're him. You are the Messiah. Peter got it. He knew. But then that wasn't the end of the lesson. Jesus says, well then, you need to know what's getting ready to happen. I'm heading back to Jerusalem because I'm going there to die. I'm going to die. All these religious leaders that have been after us, been fussing about me, they're going to have their victory. They're going to put me to death. Peter, who just answered the question correctly, is the top of the class right now. Jesus, come here a minute. We got to talk. Calls him over to the side and starts to chastise Jesus. Now this is Peter. Jesus. Listen, we're at the top of the ratings. Things are going well. Everybody wants to be part of who we are. We can sell commercial breaks all day. We've got it going on right now. You just fed 4,000 healed blind. We're going well, Jesus. Remember the last incident you had with those leaders of the religious people? We put them down. You are rolling, Jesus. What? Death doesn't sell. Doesn't sell. Don't be talking this death stuff. It's no good. It's what Peter's telling you. Doesn't sell. Jesus says, wait. Got it all on. That's a human thing you're talking about. I want to talk to you about some divine things. They will kill me, but it won't stay that way. He goes, Peter, as a matter of fact, I'm going to rise from the dead, and it will be the most important thing that happens in history. You'll be part of it. I'm going to Jerusalem to die, but that's not the end of the story. But for you, you need to know you're tied into the human part. It's time to go with the divine, he tells him. And with the divine, with that eternal life, with that rising from the dead, there is suffering. And those who would tell you in the Christian life that it's not, that all of it is joy and celebration, have lied to you. There is suffering involved. Mark's the clearest gospel probably about that. He turns and says, hey, we're going to do this part, and it's the most important part, and it's going to involve suffering, and that's what's going to happen. You're going to suffer. It's part of that human experience, and it's part of following me if you're going to do it, Jesus tells the disciples and anyone who would like to be. It's going to involve suffering. I told you just a few moments ago about Chicago, and we were there. I got to renew friendships as we always do. And when I arrived that Sunday, we arrived in Chicago about 4 weeks ago. One of the young men who I had known almost all his life, Ansel, was wearing a t-shirt remembering his nephew who was shot. If you've watched any of the newspapers in the last few weeks or seen anything on TV, you know that that is becoming crazy in the south side of Chicago where we're working. Shootings are just at a ridiculous number of people that are being shot every week, and the killings are just unbelievable. And the people that are being shot are 19 to 25-year-old males, black males particularly. Ansel is 19 years old. His cousin, or not his cousin, is actually his nephew that was shot, who I knew since he was 3 years old, Dion, who you may remember we prayed for that family in 2014 when Dion was killed in gun violence. Ansel, I remember being the one that we loved. Ansel and Dion were being in Bible camp together, and Dion never said a word and was sweet and did everything, and Ansel had cobalt glasses and was just the biggest pain in my behind ever. It's just who he was. If you had something that was about to go wrong, you teachers know this, he was going to point it out immediately. If you messed up and said something wrong, Ansel noticed that, and everybody else was going to notice that. Just the kind of young man he was. He was just the one you wanted to just squeeze the head off of him. That was Ansel. Now Ansel was shot this spring. He survived it, and it changed his life. He and I spent a lot of time riding and talking together because he lives about 15 minutes from the church, and I would go pick him up every morning after I'd pick up other children that were coming to the club, drop off our group there, had everything started. I'd go get Ansel so he could come help out. And he would talk to me. He took a whole week off his current work now to come work at the church. He had a change of life when that happened. He was with a friend. Now, this is the second time he'd been shot. The first time was just grazed. This time, he was with a friend who he didn't give me all the details, but basically done something he shouldn't have done. And the friend had the guy that was after him showed up, and Ansel was not clued in. Well, the friend got up to run, and Ansel didn't know to get up and run, and the guy shot him instead of Ansel. He shot twice with a .22. One went right through. The second one landed in his small intestine, and he spent about a week in the hospital recovering. And during that week, changed his life. He said, I decided that life was more valuable than I thought, and that God meant more to me and had decided to save me for some reason. And so he was committed to the church, and now is a leader in that church and is active in that church. But I read the newspaper. First morning I was there, I did it on my phone, and after I read it, 19 shootings had happened on Sunday that we were there. 12 were people that were killed. 11 of them, 19 to 25-year-old black males from the south side of Chicago. I go to pick up Ansel that morning, and I said, Ansel, you are 19 now. How will you not become a statistic? And he told me, he said, well, I've already been shot twice. I figure my odds are pretty good. And I laughed with him, and then I said, it is so sad that he has to think that. I don't know what will happen in the south side of Chicago, but I do know people will die, and pain will happen to families like Ansel's and Dion's, and I don't know what the answer is to that question. But I do know suffering is real, and it happens every day if you live in that community. Somebody you know someone you're connected with knows somebody if they haven't had a family member who's been shot. Suffering is real. Jesus tells us that. But the presence of God through it is what we plan on, and that we believe in something bigger than just this dying thing, that there is resurrection on the other side of that. And that's what Jesus wanted these disciples to start to realize. It's not just about that part of the story. The story continues. It has an ending, or it has a continuation that we celebrate, although there will be suffering in hard times. As a matter of fact, he goes on to tell those that gather around beyond the disciples, if you want to follow as well, come on, but you're going to have to take up your cross and follow me. And I'm sure they had no idea. Remember, this is new news to them. Take up your cross, what is he talking about? They had no idea what Jesus was saying. It was one of those things you learn and remember in retrospect for these disciples. They would understand what the cross meant. They would learn the difference between human understanding and divine things. You must take up your cross, Jesus told them. Because he said this crazy thing, those that save their life will lose it. But those who lose their life for him and the gospel will save it. What kind of nonsense talk is that, Jesus? How do you make sense of that even now, even as we look back and know what Jesus was talking about? Besides the death this week of Aretha Franklin, which was significant, she learned her gospel through the church and how to sing her faith. There was another death that happened this week. He was not quite as known, probably, unless you're in biology. Alan Rabinowitz died this week. If you've known anything, studied anything, looked into big cats, jaguars, panthers, those kind of things in the world, he was the expert. He was only in his 60s when he died, but he was the one that knew that. Alan was the Jaguar King, he called him. And the interesting thing about Alan, he grew up in New York City. He used to go to the Bronx Zoo, he said, as a child, and see the big cats. And he had a problem. Alan was a stutterer as a child. Terrible stutterer. As a matter of fact, it was so bad, it isolated him from the rest of the world. He said, I just would not even talk unless I just absolutely had to. In school, at home, anywhere. But when I went to that zoo and saw those big cats, he said, suddenly, we could tell the same story. When they would look at me and I would look at them. And then he tells a powerful story of the first time he saw one, same way, but in the wild, where there was no glass or a cage between them. He's an incredible story that he tells, and an incredible story of faith that he talks about. But he talks more about how God gifted him with stuttering. He said, if I wouldn't have had that stutter to isolate me, I would have never found my solace in wild animals, and I would have never connected with big cats, and I would have never become the voice for them in saving them throughout the world that he has become. He said that gift of stuttering came to me. He said, but the hardest thing for him was that in his life, he finally, later in life, had children. And he had a son, and his son was a stutterer. He said, I would never want my son to have that, and never see it as a gift to him. And he said, the more we have grown up together, the interviewer at the time was saying, well, haven't you been a model for him? And he said, yes, I have. And it's been amazing how it's brought the two of us together, and how we've been able to move forward and help him go on with his life as a stutterer. And she said, well, isn't that a lot like what Jesus does for us? And he said, it definitely is. Suffering is true. The pain that we even pass on to the next generation is awful. But to know that the presence of our Father is with us, that God is with us no matter what, and that Jesus bears that cross with us and leads us on even when it seems more than we can bear. Jesus said to them, for those who want to save their life will lose it, And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Let us pray. Oh God, we find it hard. We find it hard to follow you through the hard times. It seems much better when people are being healed and when miracles are happening. When religious leaders are being put down, we like that. But when it turns to the cross, often we like to turn away. But we know that's a big part of the story. The crucible part of the story, the part that changes everything. And we thank you for that. Help us to learn to follow you even through the suffering and pain. To realize with Peter that you are the Messiah and that you do call us to pick up our cross if we will be a disciple and follow you. Give us courage. In Jesus' name. Amen. In just a moment, we're going to stand up and sing our hymn of response, hymn number 655. We'll sing the first and last verse of it. Maybe there's a decision you need to make this day. Maybe you've never put Christ first in your life and want to talk to me about that front. I'd love to talk to you about that. Maybe a decision to make this church family your church family. I'd love to talk to you about that. Or maybe God has laid a calling on your heart that you need to share. Something that he has called you to do. I'd love to hear about that. Or maybe just right where we stand. Maybe just to make a decision to truly be a disciple of Jesus through the suffering and the bearing of the cross. As we stand and sing together. As you go from this place, go in the hope of the Holy Spirit, from which there are no boundaries. As you go from this place, go in the peace of Christ, which begins in your life and spreads out to this community and into the world. As you go from this place, go in the love of God, which wells up in your heart and spills over to the places where you live, work, go to school, and play each day. As you go from this place, go in the hope of the Holy Spirit, the peace of Christ, and the love of God to serve the Lord together. Amen.